everybody, how's it going? Let's talk about your home recording studio. If you found this video, what I'm assuming is that you're looking to get your foot in the door. You're looking to get started. You're not exactly sure. You've done some research. You've Googled around on the web, and there's a lot of there's just a dizzying array of information out there and misinformation. Hopefully I don't add to that. What I want to do is help settle your nerves a bit and help arm you with the information you need in order to get started. Okay? So, what all are you going to need? Well, the very first thing you're going to need is a sound source. If you think of a source of sound, it's something that makes noise. We're dealing with audio here. Audio is noise. So the very first thing you need is something that makes noise. If you play an instrument, that's your sound source. If you sing, that's your sound source. If you play an electronic instrument, a keyboard, a drum machine, that's your sound source. It's something that generates noise. It's the beginning of this entire chain of elements that we're going to talk about. Everything that happens downstream from here is kind of secondary. It's all just capturing what happens from your source. Your source is the most important thing. So since it's the most important thing, you have to make sure that your source is as good as it can be. If it's an instrument, make sure your instrument is tuned, that it's in good shape, that it's intonated properly. If it's your voice, make sure your voice is in good shape. You're warmed up, you're practiced, you know your part, you're well rehearsed. Nothing that we do from this point forward is going to be able to save a sound source that sounds like crap. You've got to make sure that your source is as good as it can be. And really, that makes everything downstream from here so much easier because it's just a process of capturing. You just capture what the source is doing. And if the source sounds good, it makes everything so much easier. So you've got your sound source, your instrument, your voice, whatever it is. The next thing you need is something to capture that source. That source is making noise. How do you capture that noise? Well, if it's an electronic instrument like an electric guitar, an electric bass, maybe a synthesizer or a keyboard, basically something that has a jack on it that you can plug a plug into, well then that cable becomes the capture device, essentially, or at least the transmission device for the noise, for the sound. If you're playing an acoustic instrument or if you're singing, then you need a microphone. A microphone is what's going to capture acoustic noise in a room. The next element in the chain is basically the other end of that cable. So you plug a cable into the microphone or you plug a cable into your electric guitar. What's at the other end of the cable? Well, this leads us into a very large topic. I could probably devote an entire episode just to this, but a high-level description is this is going to be an audio interface. In our world of computer audio, and that's what I'm focusing on here in this series is computer-based audio. There are other devices you can use, things like standalone recorders and analog mixers and devices. I'm not going to get into all that. The audio interface is basically today's standard for what us home recording types are going to use because they're cheap, they are very high quality, and they do everything we need them to do. So an audio interface has a few different jobs. The first job it has is to take the signal that you're feeding it. So you've made a sound at your source. That sound has been captured either by a microphone or by a cable plugged directly in, and the other end of that cable plugs into your audio interface. If you're using a microphone, the first job of the audio interface is to amplify the signal it's receiving from the microphone. Microphones and electric guitars and basses, they put out a very, very small voltage. Very small. That needs to be amplified in order to be a usable signal. So a device on the audio interface called a preamp or a preamplifier takes that very small voltage and amplifies it a little bit to what we call line level. So after the preamplifier, the next thing that an audio interface needs to do is take this analog signal, this voltage, this continuously variable voltage, and it needs to chop it up into little tiny pieces called samples, and it needs to represent each one of those samples so that a computer can do something with it. This is essentially the process of taking the sound that a microphone captures and translating it into ones and zeros. And a computer can deal with that. A computer can store it, it can manipulate it. So that process is called analog to digital conversion, or ADC. And an ADC is an integral component of an audio interface. The next thing it needs to do is actually send that newly digitized information to the computer. And it does this through any one of a number of different types of connections. The most common today would be a USB connection, maybe a FireWire. This is 2016, and the FireWire has starting to be phased out, really. Or Thunderbolt, or USB 3, or if you're really old school, it would be a PCI, which is an actual card that you install in a big tower desktop computer. If you're using a laptop, most likely your laptop, if you're a Windows or PC person, it's probably USB. If you're a Mac person, it's either USB, maybe FireWire, or the newer Thunderbolt. But that connectivity is how the ones and zeros get to your computer. And the third job of your audio interface is to do the opposite of analog to digital conversion, which is digital to analog conversion. And that is taking the ones and zeros and translating them back into a continuously variable voltage that powers your speakers. Well, it doesn't power your speakers, but it sends a line level signal to your speakers. And that's how you actually hear what you're doing. So this audio interface has several jobs to do, and the beauty of the modern audio interface is that it's all wrapped into one package, one little box. And that one little box does all these things for us in a relatively inexpensive package. So your entry-level audio interfaces are probably range in price from the very cheapest of like the Behringer UAC series, which I think start at like the $30 to $50 range. You've got some, right at about the $100 range. You've got, I think is it the Lexicon Alpha? I can't. I'll put the correct name here in captions below. But it's maybe about $100, maybe a little less. And then probably today in 2016, probably the most popular entry-level audio interface would be like the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. And that one I've actually used. A friend of mine has one, and I was actually very impressed with the preamp quality, with the quality of the DAC and the ADC, and just the features for $150. It's pretty darn good. And actually now, so this is it's almost July 2016 now, and Focusrite just released a second revision of the Scarlett 2i2. And they address some of the problems that they had with it. But without getting into too much detail about specific brands and models and everything, because again, if this video lives online for a while, this information isn't going to matter that much in another 5 years. It's going to be a whole new crop of entry-level interfaces. But what I really want to stress is that a computer and an interface are really going to be two of the most important things that you are going to need to purchase or borrow or rent. I don't know. Those are going to be the very first things you're going to need to invest in if you're going to have a home studio. You could go simpler. Now, if this is just for kind of scratch pad, if you're never going to have to worry about multiple people playing at one time, or you're not really gonna, if it's just for your own personal consumption, I guess there's probably nothing wrong with just taking your laptop and taking some sort of microphone that has one of those little 3.5 millimeter adapters at the end and just plug it into the the microphone input of your laptop, you can do that. The biggest problem with that is that if you're using what's known as a dynamic microphone, I guess that will work all right. But if you're using what's known as a condenser microphone, those require a voltage to be fed to them. The microphone input on a laptop or on a tablet or whatever isn't going to be able to supply enough voltage, and you're never 100% sure how the adapters that you're going to need are going to correlate all the different connections together internally. So even if by some blind luck your built-in sound card supplies a voltage, there's no telling that it's going to get to the right piece of the cable at the microphone end. Okay, one other option that you have if you're just getting your foot in the door, if you're just wanting to record yourself, nobody else, or if you're going to want to stick a mic in the middle of the room, record multiple people all at once, you could use a USB microphone. I can't wholeheartedly really recommend a USB microphone because they have some inherent problems. They're fine if that's the only microphone that you're going to want to plug into your computer. Maybe if you're doing a podcast or game commentary kind of thing, or anything where you're going to be the only single sound source and you're going to have one microphone in front of you and that's all you're ever going to need, then sure, there's nothing wrong with using a USB microphone. A couple of the inherent problems with the USB microphones is that they tend not to have very good gain controls or volume controls. So if your voice is too loud, your only option is to put the microphone farther away from you. And if I do this, you can start to tell the farther the microphone is away from you, the more room ambience you pick up, the more roomy it's going to sound. So that is a consideration. And also with USB microphones, they have an audio interface built into them. And so when you plug it into your USB port, it becomes the one and only audio interface that your machine can use. And so you can't plug a second USB microphone in. Again, this is 2015 or 2016, so maybe years down the road they'll come up with some way. So USB mics they're a viable option, especially for entry-level stuff. But I have a feeling that if you get serious about home recording, you're going to outgrow a USB microphone very quickly, and there are those inherent kind of drawbacks. The gain, the volume, they're easy to overload, and there's not much you can do about it. Let's say you're recording electric guitar and your amplifier is very loud. If it overloads that microphone, there's just not much you can do about it without moving the microphone back, and then that greatly affects the sound quality that you get. Okay, so those are going to be the first few things. So what we've covered so far: you need your sound source. You need something to receive that sound source. You need an audio interface. Really, the next step in the equation is going to be the software that you use. The software we normally call a digital audio workstation, or a DAW. A lot of people just pronounce it as DAW. I like to say DAW. That's just me. That's probably because I don't like the band DAWs, and they just sounds too much like that, I guess. So you're gonna need a DAW. You're gonna need some software. There's a bunch of software out there that can do it. So some familiar names to you might be Steinberg's Cubase. There is Kakos Reaper. There is Pro Tools. There is PreSonus's Studio One. There is Apple's Logic. There are all sorts of different DAW software suites. But there's also the very entry level, and probably one you've seen in your initial research, is Audacity. Audacity is a very simple, free piece of software. Honestly, if you're just going to do one track at a time, Audacity can probably do it. The problem with Audacity is that it doesn't support a very important protocol for home recording, and that protocol is ASIO, or ASIO. ASIO is a particular type of driver that most audio interfaces use. And it is a very highly efficient way of getting audio through a computer and back out. It essentially bypasses a lot of needless junk that happens inside the computer, and it's a very kind of pure digital audio path to get into the computer and back out. It's very fast. The alternatives, and I'm speaking from a Windows perspective. I'm not a Mac guy. No offense to the Mac people, and but even with Macs, the ASIO drivers are still important. But the alternative in the Windows world is WDM or Direct Sound, and those are fine, and those are also all that Audacity supports. The problem is they're slow. So if you have your headphones on and you are listening to yourself record something and you make a noise, it's going to take a considerable amount of time for that sound to get into to get digitized, to get to the recording software, and then to get translated back to analog and back into your headphones. And that amount of time, we call that latency. And latency is the mortal enemy of home recording. Latency is bad. Latency makes it very difficult for you to do what you're trying to do. You're trying to make music, and music is rhythmic and is very tied to timing. And when you make a noise and you don't hear that noise back for a half a second, then that completely destroys your ability to keep your timing, your rhythm, and all these things that are very important to us as musicians. So Audacity, it's fine, it's free, and as getting your foot in the door, go ahead and download it. Heck, hit pause right now, go download it. I'll wait. Okay, so you got it downloaded, you got it installed. Now you don't know what the heck to do with it. That's okay. It's actually not all that complicated. There's some good tutorials out there. While you're here on YouTube, go look down the list of search results and find some tutorials for Audacity. But really, once you really after you get your foot in the door, what you're really going to want is a better purpose-built piece of software. What I use and what I'm going to recommend, and through all my tutorials from this point forward, what I'm going to exclusively use is a DAW called Reaper. Reaper it's very flexible, it's very powerful, and even though it is flexible and powerful, just like honestly all of the big DAW software suites, they're all powerful. They're all great. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but baseline for a beginner, they're all fantastic. They're all very capable. It's just that a lot of them are expensive. You've got Cubase. So if you bought an audio interface, you probably got either a copy of Cubase LE or maybe Ableton Live Lite. I think that those are the most common ones that come with audio interfaces today. And those are fine. Those are gonna suit all of your needs for quite a while to come. It'll take you a while to outgrow them. The thing that I like about Reaper is that it's fully featured. I think that it's very easy to understand. I think that you don't have to dig into its more nuanced features. The things that it presents to you from the very first time you bring it up are very intuitive, and it's also much more affordable than the full-on suites available from other manufacturers. So if you got a copy of Cubase LE, which is like their kind of light version of Cubase, once you outgrow that and you want to buy a full version of Cubase, you're talking a couple $100 or a few $100. The same with Apple's Logic. I mean, that's and don't get me wrong, Logic is awesome. I've seen people use it, and it is fantastic, but it's also very expensive. Same for Pro Tools. Even though Pro Tools has done a lot, Avid has done a lot in recent years to bring the initial cost of getting started down. I have a bias against Pro Tools. I'm not a fan, and it's basically a holdover from their years of having this kind of elitist kind of attitude towards it wasn't for the home recordist. It wasn't for a guy like me in his basement. It was for professional studios, and it was priced accordingly. And you had to buy their hardware, and you had to use their hardware if you even wanted to boot up their software. I still got a little bias against them about that, even though that's no longer the case. It's much more affordable now, and especially if you got a free copy of Pro Tools with your audio interface, use that. It's great. And if you ever have any aspirations of interfacing with a professional studio or working at a professional studio, knowledge of Pro Tools is going to be absolutely critical, because that's what they all use. All the pro studios use Pro Tools. But hey, you're not here because you're starting a pro studio. You're here because you're starting a home studio. And for a home studio, I'm going to recommend Reaper, and I'm going to stand by that recommendation. I've been using it for a long time. I've been with it for a few versions now, and I am happy as can be. I love Reaper. I think it's terrific. So you can go to Cubase' website. You can download a free evaluation copy of it. It is completely fully featured, fully functional. There's nothing disabled in the evaluation version. You can use it for up to, I can't remember if it's 30 days or 60 days. After that, it'll give you a nag screen to ask you to buy it. And if you do buy it, as of July 2016, it's $60, and that $60 will carry you through two full versions of Reaper. And it takes them, I don't know, they might release a new version every couple years maybe. So you're looking at probably 4 years at least of a valid license for $60, and it's totally fully featured and fully capable. It's a good software. It's worth trying. At very least, it's worth trying. But hey, there are evaluation versions of all the major different types of DAW software. I suggest you download them all. Just go to Steinberg's website, go to Apple's website, go to Cubase' website and Avid's website. Download evaluation versions of everything and see what makes sense to you. What's easiest for you to use? That's the most important thing, because no matter how many times I recommend something, or your friend recommends something, or you read a website that recommends something, if that software isn't intuitive to you, then it's worthless. It's completely worthless. So go download a few. Grab Audacity, grab Cubase, grab Pro Tools, grab Logic, grab Studio One, grab Multimix, and there's a couple that I can't even remember offhand. Try them all. Figure out what works for you. All of my tutorials are going to be in Reaper, but still the same basic principles are going to apply no matter which DAW you use. Okay, so we've discussed the software a little bit. The next step in the equation is getting the sound out of your computer so you can hear what you've been doing, so you can hear the playback. Your audio interface is going to handle the first step of that, which we discussed a little bit earlier, which is the digital to analog conversion. And that's great. But what are you going to plug into your audio interface to make noise? So what you're going to need is one of two things. You're either going to need a pair of headphones, or you're going to need some speakers. Now, the headphones are going to be a crucial thing. And honestly, if you're just looking to just get your foot in the door, I'd recommend just get a pair of headphones. It's not ideal when you start mixing and when you start trying to make mix decisions, but still a good set of headphones are going to go a long way, and you will use them forever because you're going to need them every time you track, especially if you are using a microphone. If you think about it, let's say you want to play guitar, and you play your guitar track, and you got a microphone in front of it, and you record what you're doing, and okay, great, that's one track in your DAW. Now you're going to want to come back and sing some vocals over the top of that. Well, you don't want to play that guitar track back over speakers, because the microphone is going to hear it, and you try to record your vocal track. If the microphone also hears what the speakers are doing, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. You don't want that to happen. So what you're going to want to do when you're tracking, when you're multi-tracking, which is laying one track over another and going back over it and back over it, doing one instrument at a time, you're going to need a pair of headphones because you need to be able to hear the music so you can play your next part in time, but you don't want the microphone to hear the music. So you get yourself a good pair of closed back headphones, and here in a future episode we'll get into headphones a little bit more, but I'm going to recommend for tracking some closed back headphones, and that's going to go a long ways. You will use them forever. If you find a good pair and invest in a good pair up front, you'll have them until they disintegrate. It's great. Another thing that you're going to want eventually is a pair of studio monitors, and we'll get into that later. For right now, if you have some computer speakers or stereo speakers or something, that's fine for now. Really, the headphones are going to be the important part up front. Okay, so let's recap, and I think that I have covered all the bases of what you're going to need to get your foot in the door. You've got your sound source, your instrument or your voice. You've got something to capture and transmit that sound source, which is a microphone or a cable that you might need to plug into a jack on your electronic instrument. You've got your audio interface, which handles preamplification, and it handles analog to digital conversion. It handles digital to analog conversion, and it handles getting a signal to and from the computer. And then you need something to monitor on, so a pair of headphones. I do have, and I'm sure anybody you talk to is going to have lots of specific recommendations about what piece of gear they think is the best for each one of these components. It's going to be worth doing your research, look around online. Really, the most important thing is going to be trying out gear yourself. These are all very personal decisions when it comes down to it. One person's opinion, you can't really just take one person's word for it. They're all very personal things. There are a million different microphones. There are a million different audio interfaces. There's a million different types of headphones. There's a million, so each step of the way, and that's kind of part of probably why you're here. There's a lot of decisions to make, and you're trying to make decisions based on these factors that you don't really understand yet. Hopefully, I've given you a little bit of ammunition in making some of these decisions. In future episodes, I think I'm going to devote the next few episodes to maybe some more. I'm not going to say specific recommendations because, again, those age very quickly. And if I make a recommendation on a specific piece of gear today, then 2 years from now, 5 years from now, it's not going to mean anything. It's either going to be discontinued or there's going to be something better. And also, it really depends on what you're doing, on what you're performing, on what instruments you're using, and in what context you're using, how you want it to sound. Just like your software, it's very personal. It's gonna, what makes sense to you, what workflow makes sense to you. So it's really hard to make specific recommendations, but I'll probably at least see if I can narrow some of the choices down for you for entry-level stuff, maybe a few different options, even at the risk of it being completely outdated, by next week. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging with me through this first episode. Hopefully there's going to be more episodes to come. If you have any specific questions, please leave them below. They will be great material to inspire future episodes. Maybe I can dedicate a future episode to your specific question. I'm just getting off the ground here. I think I'm up to a whopping 7 subscribers. So yeah. I'm a pretty big deal. 7. Yeah. Pretty awesome. I know. So, just getting off the ground. If there's anything, any particular question you have, please list it below. If I'm capable, I will answer your question. If I am not capable, I will at least point you to where your question may be answered. All right. Hey, well, thanks a lot. This is your home recording studio. Thank you for hanging with me. I'll talk to you next time.